Hello, everyone. Thank you to each and every one of you for kicking off our Black History Month, as well as Happy Chinese New Year. With our mobilizing Chicagoland Summit, we see some amazing community leaders that are here, like corporate leader and community leader. I also want to see, I also see we have new names. Welcome and congratulations. You are officially a part of the CEDA family. So with that, I knew we had some issues with the sound, but we're going to be okay with that one. So with that being said, hi, my name is Harold Rice, President and Chief Executive Officer here at CEDA. I would be remiss not to note the timing of this summit and our journey to better understand. We celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Day 2 short weeks ago, and today we welcome 2022 Black History Month. Our organization is inextricably bound to fight for racial justice, and community action was born of Dr. King's vision and advocacy. When Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the 1964 Civil Rights Act into law, the vision began to be realized. This year marks 55 years of CEDA's service to Chicagoland area. Currently, we serve over 300,000 households annually, connecting them to the critical services they need to stabilize financially. Things like utility bill assistance and debt relief, nutritionist food, job training and certifications, and far beyond. Today, we are delivering our State of Poverty report, informed in large by the findings of the CEDA's 2021 Community Needs Assessment. CEDA issues a community need assessments for Chicagoland every 3 years. This year, our resident survey took place for March of 2020, when the country shut down due to the pandemic, which we're still in, and September 2020, when things began to open up here and there. So this community data is very helpful in guiding our transition for pandemic response to the start rebuilding together stronger. As we surveyed thousands of residents spanning the entire Cook County, giving our primary focus to suburban Cook County, which is CEDA's designated community action territory. So after we present these findings, we'll open it up to an esteemed group panelists to really dig into some of the key findings around education and childcare, mental and emotional health, and workforce development. We are so honored to have 4 fierce advocates and community leaders joining us today. We have Mrs. Alexa James, the CEO of NAMI Chicago, here today to delve into the mental and emotional health of underserved communities. For those of you that are not familiar, NAMI stands for National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is a very timely discussion given the recent tragedy of Mrs. Chesley Christ. Thanks in large part to Alexa's leadership, NAMI Chicago is a leading voice in conversations around mental health, wellness, and the challenges of the mental health system and mental health education. She has represented NAMI Chicago on the Police Accountability Task Force under Mayor Rahm Emanuel, the COVID-19 Response Task Force under Mayor Lori Lightfoot, and Mayor-elect Lightfoot Health and Human Services Transition Team, or Transition Committee. And in early 2021, the Chicago Police Department announced Alexa's appointment as their senior advisor of wellness, a consultant role aimed at building a culture of wellness and care for police officers. Mrs. Karen Freeman Wilson began serving as president and CEO of the Chicago Urban League in January 2020. She brings a passion of equity and social justice to the organization, which works to advance economic, educational, and social progress for African Americans through direct services and advocacy. Having served in the public arena most of her professional life, Karen has deep experience in addressing issues impacting urban communities. She was mayor of her hometown of Gary, Indiana from 2012 through 2019. She was also the first woman to lead the city of Gary and the first African-American female mayor in Indiana. She also served as Indiana's Attorney General, Director of the Indiana Civil Rights Commission, and presiding judge of the Gary City Court. And the list goes on and on and on. We have also Dr. Jamila Jordan, is the executive director of the Illinois Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development, supporting the development and implementation of early childhood policy across multiple state agencies. Dr. Jordan has over 30 years of experience in the field of early care and education, and has served as a Head Start Assistant Executive Director, Accreditation Project Director, and Interim Executive Director of the Chicago Metropolitan Association for Education of Young Children. Dr. Jordan was president of the Partnership for Quality Child Care, a $16 million public-private partnership that supported a citywide accreditation facilitation initiative in Chicago that helped both center-based and family care providers, not health providers. We also are joined by Julio Rodriguez, the Deputy Director of the Office of Employment and Training in the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. With over 30 years of work in human services, he is a nationally recognized speaker and trainer focusing on organizational and workforce development, cultural competency, and inclusion. Julio oversees the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, a federal program administered by the state of Illinois. Under his leadership, nationally recognized sector-based training initiatives have been developed, and over 50 million additional federal dollars have been secured to support new model programs. And one final mention, please join me in thanking Ms. Jane Hopkins, CEDA's organizational impact analyst, who has spearheaded every community needs assessment since 2016 and has been our data genius since 2012. Without her leadership, knowledge, and dedication, we could not have done it and be here today. Okay, without further ado, let me introduce you to Aaron Dalton Cowboy, our Chief Development Officer, who is here to review the State of Poverty report with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harold. And thank you for those joining us today. It's really inspiring to see the commitment to creating a healthier, happier community. And as you'll see during this presentation, there is an urgent need to better support those households living below the poverty line. In our focus groups, we spoke with heads of households from regions across the county. And I want to share some of that with you, their words, their stories, their lived experiences. A mother or two shared her worries with us. She told us that she has always struggled to find quality childcare for her special needs kids, that she was forced out of her job due to those unique needs. And on top of that, she's afraid of crime in her neighborhood, so much so that she's afraid to walk to the grocery store. And what she wants from us, she asked us to share this. She asked us to please create better programs to set children up for success. And while I'm sharing a lot of stats and data points today, I want to make sure we don't lose focus of the people who represent these figures. The national poverty rate is 12.3%. In Cook County, 14.4% of people live in poverty. That's a total of over 730,000 people, or more than 1 in 10 of our neighbors. To get to that national average of 12.3%, I think it's important for us to realize this. To get to that average, not even to surpass it, we need to empower 55,000 people to mobilize themselves out of poverty. 55,000 people to just reach the national average. To get there, we have a lot of work to do if we're going to rebuild stronger, as Harold said earlier. The demographics of poverty in Chicagoland are a reflection of poverty across the rest of America. Those living in poverty are disproportionately females, people of color, and youth. Here's what we know. Despite making up only 30% of the population, over half of those living in poverty are Black or Latino. 1 in 5 children in Cook County live in poverty. And the largest group of people living in poverty, Black women ages 25 to 34. And so that's why, with that in mind, let's take a look at what they told us during our community needs assessment. We're going to review the top 3 in each category, and they start to tell a very interesting story. The top challenge for households and communities is financial issues. For instance, we heard from one woman who didn't know how to save for retirement when she was young. And in her words, by the time she figured it out, it was too late. She's now retired and struggling to stay in her home. And even though financial issues is the top challenge, the biggest worry, the thing that concerns families the most about their households and neighborhoods, is crime and safety. We heard from another woman who was the victim of a shooting at the age of 18. She was not the intended target. And now, as a mother, she's fearful when she leaves her house, even to just go down the block to catch a bus or buy food. We hear a lot about that anxiety in our communities, and we're excited that Alexa's here to share a little bit more on that. We know that crime grows in underserved communities when they take economic hits. And we know for every instance of crime, there are many victims. We heard this throughout our focus groups. And we also know that mobilizing out of poverty, it unlocks new opportunities to live in well-resourced neighborhoods, to find an equitable job, and to break the cycle of generational poverty. So let's focus for a moment on that equitable job piece. Yes, it's well known we're seeing huge hits to employment. And of course, the pandemic caused this, but also due to long existing racial and gender inequalities, which the pandemic simply has shown a light on. Job loss has devastated low-income communities. At 200,000 jobs were lost locally from critical industries in the first 6 months of the pandemic. The accommodations and food service industries, which are the industries that employ a lot of underserved individuals, lost 65,000 jobs. Nationally, 2021 did see some job and economic recovery, but as of December 2021, the leisure and hospitality industries are still down 1.2 million jobs compared to February 2020. And Cook County is lagging behind. The economic recovery in Cook County is behind the state and nation. The unemployment rate in Black and Latino communities grew disproportionately to white communities during the pandemic, and the majority of Black and Latino households lost income. Now, women, particularly women of color, have been set back majorly in this country. President Biden just said the other day that 1.2 million women in the United States still find themselves unable to re-enter the workforce. We know women in our community can't return to work due to the lack of affordable, accessible childcare. And women disproportionately handle childcare responsibilities, meaning, for example, that when students move from virtual to in-person to hybrid and on, women suffer from the unpredictability. And as women are the backbone of all communities, when they can't thrive, the community can't thrive. And these obstacles, the pandemic, racial and gender inequalities, these are daily realities for family in need. And some of the reasons Chicago is lagging behind the national average in unemployment. I want to take a moment to talk also about youth, infants all the way through teenage years. Before the pandemic, there was a distinct lack of employment opportunities for young people, especially young people who grew up in underserved communities. And we know that a strong, consistent education is critical in giving youth skills that they need to enter the workforce. But the pandemic is widening educational gaps. These educational gaps are, widen between underserved and affluent students. Research is already showing that students with fewer resources lost more learning than their peers. In 2021, McKinsey released a report showing that affluent students and white students lost about 4 months of learning. So there's a troubling racial disparity here. Black and Hispanic students lost up to 7 months, a full school year. That gap will have a huge impact on these students as they move into the workforce in their income generating years, and it impact them for decades. I also want to obviously talk about the housing crisis. Housing is another area that has always been a major issue for families living in poverty, but it's worsened in 2020. Housing costs continue to rise even in a depressed economy riddled with unemployment and stagnant wages. In Chicagoland, the result is that 91% of low-income renters are rent burdened, meaning that they pay over 1/3 of their household income to cover rent. And alarmingly, that is a 72% increase from pre-pandemic estimates. So we're going to be sharing out the slides from this report. There is a full 180-page full report on our website, as well as an executive summary heading your way. But I really just want to highlight some of the things so far. You know, our neighbors are challenged by soaring housing costs, major barriers to gainful employment, and staggering losses in education for our youth. So at CEDA, we read these results, the amazing work that Jane did and the team, and question ourselves that when we say, like, where does this cycle end? Well, we hope that today that starts now, right? That today starts a conversation on how we can end the cycle together, you and me, CEDA, and all of us here today. And residents have been pretty honest. They have a good idea of what they need for that cycle to break. We got this program wish list directly from our residents, ranked by how frequently they were mentioned. Here are the top suggestions: youth activities, jobs, and safe places, mental health counseling and emotional support for all ages, improved systems to find information and resources, and financial education, credit repair, and money management. Now, before the chat goes, I know that many of you might be yelling behind the screen that your organization offers some of these items on the list. And we know we have amazing partners here today that do amazing work. And I hear you. We were concerned with 2 additional trends that I wanted to share. Really, they bubbled up related to this disconnect. Residents were unaware of the kinds of services available and couldn't always navigate the application process easily. So, quick aside, we've actually partnered with a referral network called Unite Us, whose entire mission is to connect residents to, services smoothly and efficiently, and a lot more. If you're interested to find out more about this social good opportunity, do send us an email at outreach@cedaorg.net, and we can share some information with you. But I know there's a lot more work to do there together. Just in closing, from my piece is, people struggle to get by every day. They lose sight of a brighter future. It's hard to dream and strive when the household is unstable. You're unsure if you can meet all the basic needs week to week, day to day. And it's our job to give them a seat at the table and the power to mobilize themselves out of poverty. That's why we're honored today to lift their voices and share them with you. But now I get to turn it over to our Chief Expansion Officer, John Patty, who's going to lead the amazing panel today to discuss all of this and more. John, take it away.
Thanks, Erin, and welcome panelists. On behalf of CEDA and our communities, I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you for your time today to discuss these important issues that plague our communities. CEDA does a lot for the community, but we can't do it all. There are a few areas in the State of Poverty report that aren't quite our main focus areas. That's why we need you here today and the power and presence that you bring to the table. So we're super happy and honored that you are here today to convene with us to provide insight and resources to the underserved populations throughout Cook County to empower families to mobilize themselves out of poverty. We know to create meaningful, sustainable change, it can't involve the siloed cookie cutter approach. We need to think intersectionally, comprehensively, and holistically, and be thoughtful about community involvement, engagement, and investment at every level, which is why we're excited to have you thought leaders here today collaborating with CEDA for this Poverty Summit. In addition to the key findings Erin shared, our assessment showed that mental health is top of mind for communities. Because of the pandemic, the isolation, anxiety, and depression that came along with it, parents spoke about needing help for both their children, excuse me, and themselves. With all that said, Alexa, I want to ask you, how can we support the whole family as they grapple with the kinds of trauma that can go hand in hand with poverty? Things like financial instability, housing instability, the adultification of older siblings, and high incarceration rates. Can you touch on those topics for us, please?
Yeah, of course. I love how I'm the first one up, which is never stressful at all, certainly. It's lovely to be here, and thank you so much for your investment in this report and sharing this information with all of our community members who feel very much aligned with these findings with the communities that we hear from, certainly, and that we serve as well. You know, I think it's so interesting because when Erin was highlighting what community was saying, what they needed, it's so basic. Actually, when we talk about how do we support a system, whether it's a family or a community or a industry or a government system, it's all based on the same components. And I wrote down what was aligned with that, which is stable and safe housing, connection, the youth programs, things like that, like connection, healing, feeling seen and heard, idea of purpose, employment. I know like Julio will talk about that certainly. And we have some questions about that later. Access to healthcare and literal access, meaning it's not prohibitive and you don't feel disempowered engaging in the healthcare system. You also feel seen and heard. So underlying all of that is equity. And so when we ask the question about how do we support a family in all of this, it's how do we support a family anyway? This idea of single motherhood we've talked about and you articulate on these slides is so unnatural to thriving of both mom and child that we have disconnected so far away from this idea of communities raising our children and communities participating. We got to get back to that. And certainly COVID really drove us away due to our physical separation. So when we're talking about families finally saying, I need help and my kid needs help, I don't think that's a new feeling. I think we've just allowed for the space for parents particularly, to be able to articulate it because we are sharing such a broad lived experience together. Obviously, people have different experiences based on where they're sitting in terms of their privilege. So what's so important is understanding as parents, and I know Dr. Jordan will talk about this, but understand as parents or anybody who's in front of children, is that our anxiety and our own worry is contagious. And it is felt by our children and it is experienced by our children in very profound ways. And it's okay for us as parents to be anxious. But what's critically important is that we have a safe enough community where we can acknowledge that and talk about it and say, Mom's feeling really worried. And I got you, and we're a team and we're a family, and I'm confident that I'm feeling worried today. I'm going to go take some time for myself. Starting to model this regulation. When I walk into the house after a long day of work and I am stressed, my children feel that and immediately become dysregulated. And so we have to think about what do we need to do to regulate ourselves. And I'm so glad you asked this question because it's like, what do we do for families? This is really about individuality. What heals people individually is critically important. What different parents need is based on what they already have access to and what's already kind of in their network that can help to mitigate the stress. Can somebody come in and provide respite, or is it just them 24 hours managing their children? Do their children know that it is safe to have a conversation about how they're feeling? And what type of education is given to parents so that they can have those conversations? Let me tell you something, I have 2 master's degrees, and that did not teach me how to have a conversation with children about mental health. We do not teach mental health literacy and conversations in a practical and general way. So that needs to be really pushed into community, but pushed into community in a way that people want to consume it. So we're speaking the same language. So we have to identify adults that are leaders who can do this peer-to-peer parent support and engagement. And we need to make sure that we talk to kiddos about self-regulation in a way that's not just a medical model. It's not just about going to see a therapist one time for 45 minutes. It's about how do we make sure that the people around our kiddos are strong and available to dose them with therapeutic interventions throughout the day. So obviously there's more to talk about with that, but when we're talking about supporting the family, we have to look at all of those components that you mentioned: housing, purpose, community, equity, and access to healthcare, and identify all of those when we're doing an assessment to say, how can we come in and support you with resources that you have or provide you resources that you don't have access to.
Alexa, thank you very much. That was very well-rounded and insightful answer. You provided a ton of great observations, ideas, and points that we all have to work collectively together, because the whole home and addressing the issues within the home is a collective effort. So thank you very much for that. And speaking of how do we address the whole home, you had mentioned, how do parents really get the resources to deal with the mental health of the children? So my next question is for Dr. Jordan, and I'd like to bring her into the discussion. And I know, Dr. Jordan, your team is putting together some great mental health programs and resources for children. Can you talk about how they're designed to help low-income children specifically?
Thank you, John, for the question. First of all, on behalf of the Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development, want to take this opportunity to congratulate President Rice and the CEDA family, the CEDA staff, on your release of your community needs assessment. I wanted to note that within the assessment, it says the number one need for parenting and family support is helping children deal with stress, anger, depression, or emotional issues. Every single parent who participated in their focus group called for services to help their children cope with loneliness, anxiety, or another emotional health concern, regardless of the child's age. And so I wanted to start my comments by referencing your needs assessment. So within the Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development, we are currently working on a statewide initiative, infant and early childhood mental health consultation. Illinois is one of a few states that actually offer infant and early childhood mental health consultation. We are looking to increase the number of consultants that are available to our providers and as well as families and their children. We want to ensure that we have increased the number of consultants so that we have consultants available within every setting where children are learning. In addition, we want to, John, reduce the amount of time in which individuals have access to consultants within their respective early childhood settings. And then finally, we are working on a public awareness campaign to the previous point to ensure that individuals are aware of the services, how to access the services, just to understand what the services are. In addition, we are using a framework, again, Illinois is one of 37 states that's referred to as a pyramid model state. And that is a social emotional framework for young children. Again, that's called the pyramid model. And so we've been really intentional about, again, expanding our work within that area as far as providing social emotional supports for our youngest learners in the state. So those are the two initiatives that, I'd like to, just share with our audience today. Again, that's infant and early childhood mental health consultation, as well as the pyramid model framework.
Dr. Jordan, thank you so much for that information. And thank you for sharing these great programs and the commitment of the Governor's Office and your team to continue to work in partnership with the communities in need to create these opportunities. It takes a village in this sense, a community, and we have to continue to strive to make sure that the future is bright, because these programs help develop the youth that will be the leaders in our next generation to come. And, it's getting more and more difficult to create that sustainability. And once again, pulling this collective group of individuals together to address these issues is certainly a great start to getting to that point. And so Alexa touched on the whole family. Dr. Jordan, you touched on, younger children. What I'd like to do is now kind of go into another segment of youth, which is that middle age range to early high school, and how we work with them and how we create different opportunities. So creating employment equity is something we have a strong focus on at CEDA, including increasing diversity in clean energy jobs, which is a rapidly growing industry. So one of our answers at CEDA has been to launch what we call our G2 program. G2 program teaches leadership and advocacy skills, technical and analytical skills to high school students, and provides them industry recognized professional certifications to help them hit the ground running after high school, or in some cases, just prepare them for what the next step may be. If it's college, the program does not push an individual in one pathway or the other. And so, this we feel is a great way to get them the skills that they need to prepare for the next steps of their lives. This next question is for Julio, and it's evident that CEDA is very passionate about this, so apologize a little bit for kind of the rapid fire here, but we like to ask Julio, what does the economic recovery look like for people living in poverty, particularly people of color?
Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Dr. Rice, and those at CEDA. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you and the community folks that are here. As Dr. Jordan mentioned, the governor is very, very committed to really looking at workforce in ways that we've never have in the state. I think the other key thing is to really think about how do we move from this sort of transactional model that has been sort of plagued the workforce system for many, many years. I've been in the system for 30 years, and I can tell you, we continue to look at people like their products and like staffing agencies, and that is not the right model if we're really going to be effective for moving people out of poverty into real opportunities for wealth and for a quality of life that we're all hoping for. A couple of statistics that I think are really important to know is even though the unemployment rate overall has dropped nationally, it's at about 3.9. The reality is for most African Americans in the United States, their numbers have actually gone up. And recently, the latest number was 7.1%. And I would argue that if you really look deeply, you would probably see two-digit numbers in places like Cook County, and more specifically in the southern suburbs and western suburbs of Cook County. I think the other thing that's really alarming is that for African American women in particular, their unemployment rate has also gone up. It went from 4.9 to 6.2 in just a month. So when we think about these numbers, one of the things that it impresses upon you is while the picture can look rosy on one end, when you really look into those numbers, you realize not everybody is benefiting from what we call the recovery. And I think we really have to emphasize, why is that happening? And I would argue it's because nothing really changed for those communities. We still have been not putting the right types of investment and really localizing them. And I think one of the things that's incredibly important is from us to really think about, and Alexa talked about this, we need to think about what are the supports that people need to really move into good employment. And that includes employers. We have to become co-investors in the workforce system. They cannot be the end user. They have to be there right in the beginning. They need to think about what are the investments that they make, especially in things like early childhood, in childcare. When we look at new benefit models, we need to think about a childcare as being a critical benefit, in particular for women. I also think one of the other key things is, as we look at things like equity and inclusion and diversity, those are good words, but they need concrete outcomes. It's not about just having everyone now in the pool, but how do we ensure that we set real metrics to determine what is a good job? What is a good job for somebody in one community isn't a good job for someone else. If my job requires me to spend more of my money in transportation costs, then that isn't necessarily a good job for me, because my income is now being compromised by the fact that I have to leave the community I'm in and go someplace else, and those costs are not taken into the equation. Another key thing I think is, as we think about the new sort of job and work environment, we really need to think about more of a relational programs. We really need to teach our frontline workers who work with families that their job is about looking at the whole family and not just the individual. Because when a person walks into a job center, they're not just walking in as themselves, they're walking in with every member of their household and sometimes extended households. And we really need to think about what are the types of supports that we can put in place to help look at the whole household. Intergenerational programming we need to think about in workforce. We shouldn't just be thinking about the young person in the household getting a job, but what are we looking at in terms of their parents? Who are the folks in their household that not only will encourage them to continue to look into a career path, but how do we ensure that they themselves are on a career path? So really looking at much larger holistic models. The other thing I would say that's also really critical is thinking about how do we create programs that are learn and earn models. Apprenticeship programs, ironically, it's a very difficult program for an employer to put in, but here in Chicago, through the Chicago Apprentice Network, businesses are now changing the way they bring employees into the workplace. And in particular, how are they bringing young people from communities of color into the workplace in a way where they're learning and earning? Asking a young person in poverty to hang on and be in a program where they're not earning something for the time they're investing is an antiquated model that really doesn't look at poverty. And we really need to begin to think about how do we create scaffolds for people to learn and earn so that they're earning wages as they're developing skills. And then the last thing I want to say is, I think it's really critical that we move away from this idea of, and it's a deficit frame of thinking, is that low-skilled workers are people who don't have skills. The reality is, if you look at employers today, the things like problem solving, critical thinking, my mother had less than a third grade education, but she was the best critical thinker and problem solver that I ever met. And she managed a household with limited resources, but she managed to get it done. And I think we don't value the sort of intrinsic skills that come out of community. And we need to be able to not only measure that, but also validate that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Julio. And I couldn't agree with you more. You referenced two qualities of critical thinking and problem solving. And in the leadership track in the G2 program that we implement, that those are breakout modules that we focus areas. And so that being said, understanding how do we set up the youth, even at a younger age, to start to prepare for that transition from being a child to a young adult, to a young professional, to a professional. I'd like to pose another question to Dr. Jordan, and that is, can you speak to how early childhood development and early childhood education sets low-income children up for success?
Yes, again, thank you for the question. And so what we have seen is that the pandemic has definitely reinforced, actually heightened the visibility of early childhood, within our nation and certainly within our state. And what we know is that, economists have told us that this is the #1 public investment that we can make that has the greatest return. For those children who participate in high quality programs, they're less likely to disengage from school. They're less likely to have involvement within the justice system, they're usually able to, pursue other opportunities. They certainly do better in the K-12 system. There's just a lot of benefits as far as early childhood programs. And so we want to be sure that we're able to, support these programs, ensure that they are quality programs. What we know is that children from lower income households are less likely to have access to quality programs. And so we need to ensure that we are investing in that infrastructure. We also need to think about the families within the early childhood system. Early childhood education provides an opportunity for families to strengthen their parenting skills. For many programs, they have access to job training programs as well as other family support. So again, that's a benefit to the family. And so we want to be sure when we think about holistic, child, family, in community. And so you hear that cost benefit for, every dollar that's invested, we're looking at $7 in savings as far as the gains that we are able to make as far as our early childhood investments. And then finally, as we think about, the workforce, and I always have to acknowledge our early childhood workforce who has really been the infrastructure and the backbone during this pandemic. And we also need to realize they are working under some very challenging circumstances, as many of them are experiencing grief and loss. But we're looking at a workforce that for decades and historically, predominantly women of color who are underpaid. This is historical as far as the early childhood community. And so as we begin to think about our workforce and how we can strengthen our workforce, first of all, trauma-informed supports for our workers, definitely compensation, benefits. We want to build a pipeline of highly qualified, diverse workforce as we think about the children who are within our communities, African-American and Hispanic children, Latinx, various, references. And so we want to ensure that we have a diverse workforce. Children can't be what they cannot see. And so what we are starting to see is a need for, due to the increase in the number of children who speak languages other than English, one being Spanish, while we're starting to see an increase as far as bilingual providers within our workforce, we still have a significant need for bilingual teachers within our early childhood workforce. And so again, as we start thinking about our communities, how everyone is aware of the teacher shortage, how do we recruit, how do we retain? Most of all, how do we make this an attractive option? When we think about the workforce, how do we make this profession an attractive option for individuals? And so, as well as affordable, for families. And so that, we have to remember that. So we have to make sure that it's accessible, it's of quality, and it's affordable for families.
Thank you so much. You said something that really kind of resonated with me. And we talked about, how do we prepare the youth to transition into the different stages of their lives? And we talked about the things that are important as the whole family, as a support system. But you referenced, the disparities and opportunities in education, employment, and entrepreneurship for women of color. So I'd like to start a conversation with Karen. And women of color who own small business lack access to the capital needed to grow and succeed. With the Chicago Urban League's investment in the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, I know you have some unique perspectives on how we can give women of color the support they need to succeed. So Karen, I'd like you to provide some insight on those opportunities and resources that your organization provides and your experience in that arena.
Absolutely. First, I want to add my voice of thanks to CEDA and to congratulations on another report, one that can really serve as a roadmap for all of us as we work to solve these problems together. When you talk about entrepreneurship, one of the things that we've seen, and the Kauffman Foundation has really honed in on these statistics, that over the last year, we have seen people of color, particularly women of color, start businesses at an exponentially higher rate than others in community. what does that mean? That means that we have seen not only the entrepreneurial spirit, but opportunities that are being realized by women of color to start businesses, to find niches for consumer demand, consumer need. However, we have also seen that access to capital, access to support, access to a wider customer base among businesses and women of color who own businesses has not been as great as the opportunity to start businesses. And so that provides an opportunity for the Urban League to step in and increase and enhance that access. And we do that in a variety of ways. We do that through our cohort-based programs, both our business startup program and our Next One program. And I just want to focus for a minute on our Next One program, because we are helping businesses to scale by enhancing their customer base, but by also enhancing their access to credit. When I say enhanced customer base, very often we count on networks. We count on who we know, we count on who we have access to. Through our Next One program, we are using mentors, we are using our corporate customer base, we are using corporate board members to say, these are businesses that you should think about when you are looking for professional service providers, whether it's accountants, lawyers, engineers. These are businesses that you should think about when you look at caterers, particularly when you're doing large scale events. And these are businesses that you should think about when you are purchasing novelty items. You know, every corporation has a t-shirt. Every corporation has a jacket. Every corporation has an ink pen. Who are you purchasing those items from? They seem simple to you, but they can be a game changer for a small business, particularly a small business that's owned by a woman of color. The last thing that I would call your attention to, for the last 2 years, we have partnered with a variety of organizations, the City of Chicago, OKRP, and other advertising agencies, the Illinois Lottery, to promote Black Shop Friday. And while that's important for Black Friday, when people are shopping and are really focused on consumerism, we would say to you, don't just think about it on Black Friday. Think about who you purchase from every day of the week and make a concerted effort to diversify who you purchase from. The last thing I would say, I know I said last just a few minutes ago, but I want you to think about the focus that many local banks, many national banks have given on access to capital in the last year. BMO Harris, Capital One, Wells Fargo, Fifth Third Bank. A lot of local banks have stopped to take a look at the barriers that are created. And I would say sometimes false barriers, very often false barriers that are created because of the lack of access to capital. What are the standards for borrowing? Is it really reliable to look at some of the traditional standards, or can we expand that so that we can ensure greater access to capital among women-owned businesses, businesses owned by women of color, and generally by underserved businesses as well?
Karen, thank you so much for that answer. Super insightful. I can't agree with you more, especially around the opportunities for small businesses and then women-owned businesses of color. They need to get a loan, they need to get something to be able to float, have cash, right? Cash flow positive, but then it's like, oh, your credit isn't so good, so this interest rate is so high, so now it's like you can't even afford anything. And so I think that's really important. So we can ask 1,000 other questions and have this conversation for days. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to the last question that pertains to every panelist. So Karen, since I have you on right now, I'm going to ask you this question. Hope isn't always easy to hold on to, and that's painfully true over the past few years. How can we create hope? Give us your quick and dirty answer.
I think when we focus on creating hope, it is really the desire, the ability, and our willingness to work together. You have a group of disparate organizations. And when I say disparate, I mean nonprofit, city, county, state, and notwithstanding the differences, we are poised to work together. And when you talk about things that are as serious and as challenging as coming against the racial wealth gap, addressing institutional racism, you need all of us to work together. If I'm an individual organization and I'm just throwing something at a problem from our individual perspective, I'll help some people, but I won't help as many as I can. But if I work with the state of Illinois, if I work with NAMI, if I work with CEDA, then I'm able to put our collective efforts together and really begin to change systems. And systemic change is what gives me hope.
I couldn't agree with you more. I was taking some notes as you were talking, and I share emotionally, intellectually, analytically, and technically all of those same aspects. So thank you so much for that insight. I'd like to go to Julio and please respond to the same question. How can we create hope?
I think the first thing, and Karen, I just want to say thank you. That was so articulate. I'm almost ashamed I'm following you. But so to add my own perspective, I think that, and I'm going to say this more from a personal level. I grew up in a household that most people would have said, you have so many marks against you, there is no reason to have hope. I grew up in a home with mental illness. I, with poverty, all of these things. But I remember one thing my mother said to me was, every day that you get up and every day you take a breath gives you another opportunity for change, to change your circumstances, to change who you are, to change the trajectory of all the things that say you will go one place, but you will create where you'll go next. And so to me, those words are so important, and they influence every decision I make, which is today doesn't have to define tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's really important. And I think that the point that Karen made about collective thinking, collective power, that's what we need in terms of creating real systems change. And quite frankly, just having a panel like this, being organized by a group like you, really speaks to what we can do collectively. And information, especially when it comes from everyday people and people's experience in their everyday life, is where you can really start that foundational change. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. So unfortunately, because we're tight on time, I can't close out with the other two panelists' response. It's okay. What I'd like to do is we will get with the other two panelists, get their response, and share out to this group. So I'd like to thank all of you. And what I learned from this is that we need to do three things. We need to recognize, organize, and socialize. Those are the keys to social mobilization. recognize the problem, organize the solution, and socialize the resources. So I look forward to continuing the relationship with all of you in this collective continuum of providing the services that are needed to disadvantaged communities throughout Cook County. So thank you all very much. I appreciate your patience and understanding. And back to you, Aaron.
Thank you.
At this point, I wish to, I'm not Aaron, I'm Harold Rice again. But I wish to thank all of you. And I wish this state of poverty conversation could go on forever. Alexa, Karen, Jamila, Julio, and John, thank you from the bottom of my heart for lending your voice, insight, and expertise. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you. You inspire us every day, and we truly value your support and partnership. As we were speaking, you were making donations to fuel our work online, and we appreciate you so much. And as you can see, poverty is relentless, and so are we here at CEDA. I would be remiss not to ask you to join us on this journey, enabling us to empower our neighbors and neighborhoods in need to mobilize out of poverty. So please think about giving today or tomorrow at CEDAorg.net/donate. Let me repeat that again, CEDAorg.net/donate. We would love for you to continue the conversation. Tell us your thoughts on our conversation, what you found most interesting, what surprised you, what made you feel vindicated, all of that over the on Twitter using hashtag mobilizing Chicagoland. Be sure to tag us at CEDA Cook County. I hope everyone is feeling inspired. I know I am. Have a wonderful afternoon and a warm, healthy week. Please take good care. Thank you.